Community Schools Coordinator for SBCSS and the RTAC. Next slide, please. Please remember to sign in. We want to make sure that we know that we touched base with you and just, you know, a running list of who we got to spend the afternoon with. So please make sure you sign in. Stephanie has also dropped the link in the chat. So take a moment, sign in. I don't want to rush anybody through that. And I will bring up a reminder as we close out as well. And Stephanie will drop it in a few times in the first 5 to 10 minutes so we can make sure everyone signs in. Next slide, please. As a reminder, we are your RTAC, and we are here to support you in our partnership with 3 other counties and 3 other organizations. Next slide. We are also always want, I'll rephrase, we also want to always remember why we are here. And as the implementation grant approaches in the next few months, we want to lean into integrating implementation of community schools and collaborative approaches, and our progress monitoring and the work that we're doing to actually put the work in place that we are doing. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of who we all are. I will open us up, and Dr. Kemp will drive the show for the most part today. David Culberhouse is in the house, running the slide deck. Ms. Gately, Jennifer is not here with us today, but she will be with us next week at our COTP. And our lifesaver, Stephanie, is in the background running those links for us. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda. It's meaty. This is definitely going to be webinar style today because there is a lot of technical information that we want to make sure that everyone in the room has as we are embarking on the grant writing for the next implementation cohort. So digest those 10 things and be prepared to sit in those seats, take some standing breaks, and take a lot of notes because we want to make sure you are prepared over the next 3 sessions we have together. Next slide. But first, let's get into a little check-in. In the chat, I think I will do a waterfall. So when I say go, please type in the number of Sheldon of how you are feeling, 1 through 9. And I'm going to count it down, and it'll be 1, 2, 3, go. I love the ones. That's the type of energy I need. I think we're all at a 5, even in all of the work that we're doing. We're like, is it this? Is it this? Lots of 3s. Well, we'll bring those pensive faces and feelings into this space, and hopefully you walk out at about a 7, 8, or 9. Like, okay, I know what we're doing. I can jump on this train. And the ones in the room, if you can just share that energy through the chat as we go through the webinar, we're gonna need that. All right, next slide. Thank you for sharing, everybody. So the purpose of the implementation grant application workshop is designed to help LEAs in the Southern Inland region who are interested in applying for the upcoming grant, whether you are already in a planning grant or not. So there may be information for those who already have a planning grant in place that you already know. But we want to make sure that this is accessible to all school districts and schools who are interested in joining us in the community schools work. So the workshop is designed to help in the application process, and any needs that folks need as they apply. Next slide. So here's an overview of our scope and sequence. Day one is really an overview and background information and nitty gritty. By December 2nd, by day two on December 7th, we're going to dive into a lot more of the hands-on meat, as well as day three. So today we will really talk about the priorities for funding, estimated release of the submission, review the sections of implementation, scoring of implementation grant, suggested timeline for completion, and implementation grant RFA guide and resources. And the deck will be available after today. We'll send it out in a follow-up. So that's our scope and sequence. Next slide, please. And here's an overview. So this is the California definition that's in the California Community Schools Partnership Program framework. And it may not even grasp the meat of what the community schools is. We really want to put these things together as there are partners, educational partners, and that includes our families and caregivers. It includes our students, it includes our greater community and businesses. It includes the school and school district itself, and all the educators and staff within it. And we are all collaborating together with continuous monitoring of data that informs us of what we have, what we need in order to provide students and families with what they need so that we can optimize learning. So the idea is that we are working together as a community, and that hopefully we expand to meeting the needs of our schools and school districts in such a way that the schools become a hub of the community. Next slide, please. So we all lived through the disruption of COVID-19, but within that disruption, we found community. A lot of us stood outside of schools and handed out foods and saw long lines of material pickup and lunch pickup and distribution. And some of us ran that from a certain number of schools in our district. Some used one school, maybe even all of our schools. We were all doing it in a school district. But what we found was a way to rethink how we connect with our community and how our community is connected to us. So California has dedicated this work and resources to maintaining that thought process. Next slide, please. So community schools being fairly new to California in the last 10 to 15 years, and they have a longer standing than that across the country. And oftentimes we see 4 programmatic features in the community schools approach and strategy. And that's integrated supports and services, family and community engagement, collaborative leadership and practices for educators, extended learning time and opportunities. And the next slide shows those 4 things being embedded into what California is calling the 4x4. And that's the 4 pillars, the 4 key learning conditions, 4 key conditions for learning, 4 cornerstone commitments, 4 proven practices, and 4 key roles. Next slide, please. And this is a very popular 2-minute community schools overview that many of us have seen. But like I said before, we're opening up this workshop for all of those who are not doing the community schools work just yet, or may not be doing it just yet. So we want to make sure we're all accessing the implementation grant information from a similar space. So I'm going to ask David to go ahead and play that video for all of us.
We have it in a PDF right now.
Okie dokie. I'm going to skip that video. Go ahead and we'll come back to it. David, just go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll come back to the video. And then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kemp for a couple slides. And then Dr. Kemp, when I've got that video up and running, I will let you know and we can bring in that closeout of the community schools overview.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So the next part I'm about to take you through is actually an overview of our California Community Schools Partnership Program overview. Most of the time when you see it, I spelled it out for those who are not aware of the acronym, but you'll see CCSPP a lot when they talk about it, and this is what they're speaking about: California Community Schools Partnership Program. It is part of legislation for our California Community Schools Partnership Act, and is also under our ed codes for section 8900 to 8902 in the Budget Act of 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. As you know, California, out of all the states in the nation, has made the biggest investment in regards to having a community school framework at our school sites. Originally in 2021, we were given about approximately 3.1 billion, and then in 2022 additional 1.1 billion was added. And again, this money was just to make sure that we were giving grant opportunities to schools that were interested in implementing a community schools framework, and also that support was set up for those schools that choose to do this model. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the California Community Schools Partnership Program Implementation Grant is to make sure that we have funds for schools to either establish a new community school or expansion of continuation of a community school that they already have for their campus. As of this year, there are no more planning grants available. So moving forward, if your district or school is interested in doing a community schools grant, all of them will be implementation grants. Next slide, please. So right now, the CDE will be accepting applications for implementation grants. Again, for the purposes of the California Community Schools Partnership Program, LEAs are qualified for applying for the grant, and an LEA, according to the grant, is defined as either a school district, a county office of education, or a charter school. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview in regards to the grant. If you are going to apply this upcoming November, when the application is released, and it will be due in approximately mid-February, you are applying for cohort number 3, which means the grant will last from the years of 2024 through 2029. It is, again, a 5-year grant. School sites, depending upon the size of how many students that you have, you can receive up to $500,000. Again, it's all based on size. With the grant, you get an equal amount of funding years 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when you get to the 5th year of the grant, they will lower the amount for the grant because they want you to work towards sustainability after the grant funds have been relinquished. They're no longer available. And again, this is for any school that chooses to be a community school, is trying to expand their current community school, or they're trying to continue as a community school. Next slide, please. So with the grant, a community school is defined as any public serving preschool, kindergarten of any grades 1st to 12th inclusive, and include the following services. That means as a community school, you will have integrated support services, which means you're working on services to support health, mental health, academic, social services, early childhood education, as much as you can provide supports for your needed population at the school site. You are also working on family and community engagement, making sure that the families are involved and that you are getting community partnerships to assist with your community schools work. Next slide, please. You're working on collaborative leadership and practices for educators. That means as a school site during this time that you have the grant, you're training your staff that's certificated and classified, just to make sure that you're all on the same page in regards to your intentions with the community school grant, and that everybody has the training necessary for implementation. And last, extended learning, giving opportunities for students before, during, and after school for activities that extend their learning or enrich their current learning. Next slide, please. So before I continue with the next part, I'm going to have Siobhan show us the video before I go to this next slide, so you can get an idea of what do we mean in regards to integrating all these services to implement a community schools model.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, David, I will need the screen.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties.
That's okay. Go ahead and let's move forward, Dr. Kemp, and we'll get the video out to people. You're still on mute, Dr. Kemp.
Apologies. Next, we're going to go over funding in regards to the grant. So in the grant, they will give you allowable ways to spend your money. So what we're going to do is we're going to review each of the pillars and how you're able to spend money with the grant if you so choose to apply for it. So for integrated services, which is one of the 4 pillars of community schools framework, you are able to spend grant money on professional development and planning time. If you're trying to work on targeted and instruction and intensive tutoring due to learning loss from COVID-19. You're able to use it for common planning time to develop a shared vision in regards to your implementations of the community schools framework. You're also able to use it on professional development to make sure that you are promoting practices such as PBIS, restorative practices, trauma-informed instructional approaches. Next slide, please. In addition, you're able to spend money on the development of leadership coaching, just to make sure that you are supporting your administrators, teachers, and families as you're implementing the community schools framework. And last, you can use it for coordination of services such as MTSS, your cost system, and other classroom and school day supports. So those are examples of how you can spend the grant in regards to the integrated services pillar. Next slide, please. For family and community engagement, yes, you can do professional development and supports for making sure that you are providing the right type of learning environment for your families and community partners. You can also spend money on strengthening those connections and making sure that you are engaging families in activities that works towards having a community schools model at your school site. Next slide. For collaborative leadership and practices for administrators, you can use it towards funding for needs and assets assessment to make sure that you are identifying the needs at your school site so you can know how to properly plan. You can use it for training and planning of meetings between personnel at the school and partners to make sure that you are setting up partnerships and programs at the school site that benefits the community schools framework. You can also use it funding towards dedicated staff, such as community school coordinators that will assist with your implementations of the community schools framework. Next slide, please. You may also use it to invest in programs that promote positive behavior interventions, restorative practices, and trauma-informed instructional approaches. You can use the funding to build capacity of educators in regards to how they can make the right type of decisions in regards to the community schools framework. And last, you can use it for planning time to identify the needs of students and how you can support them in this community schools framework. Next slide, please. The last slide is for extended learning opportunities. So under this, you can use funding for professional development that will be used to expand and enrich curriculum strategies at your school site. You can use it for stipends, planning times, and support for educators who are putting in the time for the training and to do this work. You can also use it for LEA serving elementary, such as childcare and early learning program for those staffs that have an early child education program at their elementary school site. Next slide, please. So we brought this up earlier when we were speaking of up to $500,000 per site if you were to qualify for this grant. This is the current chart that they have available through CDE that breaks down how much you could possibly get per school that will be applying for the grant. As you see with the smaller schools, you have 150, your small schools at 250, medium 300, medium large 400, large 500,000. If you notice, you'll get that amount for the first 4 years. But when you get to the 5th year, you're going to see a dip. This is the 25% amount that I was speaking of earlier. The purpose of decreasing the amount the last year is to ensure that during the time of the grant that you are working towards sustainability. The grant is to help you get on your feet, to help get those services up and going and get the training that you need. But a big part of the grant is how are you going to sustain all the practices, all of the programs, all of the partnerships that you put in place during the time of the grant to ensure that those services don't go away once the grant is over. What can you do? What other type of funding can you utilize so you can sustain all the actions, all the programs, and everything that have been implemented during the time of this grant? So again, be mindful that if you are applying for this grant, there's an expectation that you're going to be planning for sustainability during the time of the grant, which you have. Next slide, please. Implementation grants awards have a matching qualification as well. So whatever amount that you receive, your LEA must match it by 1/3 of the total amount that you receive. So if you can go back to the previous slide. So if I am a medium school and I have received 1.4 million over my 5 years, as a LEA, I'm responsible to match 1/3 of that. So that is one of the things that is expected through the grant. Next slide, please. Next slide over. So let's talk about, are we eligible for this grant? Eligibility for this grant means that you have 50% or more of enrolled pupils at the LEA or consortium that are considered unduplicated pupils. So unduplicated pupils mean you have a student that's enrolled as an English learner, they qualify for free or reduced lunch, or they are a foster youth. That is what's considered an unduplicated pupil. You can have 50% or more. Your LEA consortium has a higher than state average dropout rates. So the way you would get this information is you can go to your California dashboard if you're a high school, and you can see what the state average is for dropout rates. And if your rate is higher, then you should be able to qualify. The LEA or consortium has higher than state average rates for suspension and expulsion. Same thing. You can look at your district or school, depending upon how you're applying. Go to the California dashboard and check these numbers to see if they're over the average. And then last, a LEA or consortium can apply on behalf of one or more schools that fit the criteria above. So there was a question, and is that for the overall LEA individual schools? It depends how the district is applying. You have some districts that will apply as a whole. You have some districts that will apply on behalf of schools. You have some schools that will just apply individually with support of their district. So it really depends on how you apply. So basically, whichever way you apply, you have to hit one of those criteria to make sure that you are eligible. I hope that answers your question, Melinda. Next slide, please. So now that you're eligible, so let's say one of those ways that was explained just now, I know that I am eligible for applying for the grant. Now we have what's considered competitive priorities. So you will be funded based on the competitive priorities that the state has for the grant. So competitive priorities are, and they're in order from number 1 through number 9. So top 1 is 80% of the pupil population are unduplicated pupils. That is considered a competitive priority area. Now remember, don't get worried about this. You only need 50% or more to apply. You're eligible for applying. But in regards of one of the ways that you will get funded quickly is if you fit in one of these competitive priorities. So one of them is 80% of the population are unduplicated pupils. Your LEA or consortium has a high need due to any way that they were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The applicants have a need for students and is planning to support services based on, how can I say it in a way that's not too technical, but basically there's a high need of supports needed for families and students that your funding can't cover. So that would be considered a competitive priority. If you are committed to trauma-informed health, mental, and social services in a tiered system within your project that you put in for your community schools grant, that's considered a competitive priority. Next slide, please. Elementary schools, and this is really looking at early care and education. So those schools that have a birth to 5 years program at their school site, where parents demonstrate a need for childcare and things in that nature, you are considered a competitive priority because they have other children of school aged that need to go to school and they need to get there on time, and the needs of having the younger kids kind of prevent that process for coming to school on time, for them being really actively involved in the educational process. If that is one of your needs, you are considered a competitive priority for the grant. Applicants they are constantly collaborating with community-based organizations, and there is a need for direct services immediately, they qualify as a competitive priority. Next slide, please. And these are the last 3. If there is a need to build capacity within your learning environment to ensure that students are getting everything that they need, that's considered a competitive priority. If you have a plan of sustainability once the grant has expired that you can lay out that shows that you will make sure that other funding is available to continue to implement your community schools model. That is considered a competitive priority. And lastly, which was just approved this past year, applicants serving small and rural schools. So if you have a small school site and you're in a rural area, you're considered a competitive priorities. So I'm going to stop for a moment to see if there are any questions, because this was a huge chunk of information that I was summarizing, because I did not want to read from the slide. I just wanted to give you a summary. So I
Dr.
do,
Kim,
yes,
there's
go
only
ahead.
one question in the chat that you haven't answered, and that is, if a consortium applies, do all LEAs need to be over 50% unduplicated population?
I want to say if they apply as a consortium, if I'm correct, they need to be a average 50%. So if I have maybe one consortium that's at one entity that's at 40, one that's at 70, and the other may be at 50. If they as a group average to that 50% of more, they should be able to qualify for applying for the grant. I hope that answered the question, Cara.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
And just to add, Dr. Kemp, when you're looking at your unduplicated student population, it also includes your socioeconomically disadvantaged, along with your foster youth and your English learners.
Thank you, David. Next slide, please. So the program outcome measures for the community schools partnership program grant is, in the long run, we want to make sure that we are providing our students with learning supports, learning opportunities. We are implementing community-rooted and culturally relevant instructional practices. We have positive and nurturing school climates, and that through this, we have been able to develop strong partnerships, not only with the community, with our students and families, to make sure that we are improving the outcomes of students. So regardless of all the different ways you would qualify, all the different competitive priorities, at the end of the day, your reason for applying, will it better the outcome of students? Because at the end of the day, this is about how we can better serve students through a community schools model, so we can give every student a chance at being successful. And the way we're going to do that is making sure that we are using this grant in a way that we are providing supports and services based on the needs of the community to ensure that students are being successful. Next slide, please. Different ways that grantees can work towards making sure that we are looking at positive student outcomes. There are suggested strategies that are within the grant. You can focus on how you're going to effectively engage the stakeholders, so that students, teachers, families, and community partners during this process. You're looking at establishing and expanding partnerships, supports, and services that meets the needs of your local community. You're expanding student-centered teaching practices and enrichment opportunities during school and outside of school, because we know some students need a little bit more than what we can offer in school. We're taking every opportunity to enhance positive support, inclusive, and racially just school climates. This is done through relationship building, through establishing positive behavior supports, and through restorative practices. We're demonstrating that we are collaborating as a whole, and we're doing shared decision making in the best interest of our stakeholders. And last, we're developing systems and practices necessary to get to the outcome of positive student outcomes. There's one question in the staff. Do all of the partnerships need to be in place at the time of the grant application? No. Some people may not have any partnerships, which is a need for them to have a grant. Some may be in the process of, they've been working on building partnerships, and this grant will take them to the next level. Some are looking at the partnerships that we have may not be enough. So everyone will probably be in different places in regards to community partners. But if you do get the grant, it is a good idea that if you do not have community partners, based on your needs and assets assessment, which we'll get into a little bit later, that you'll be able to identify those services and supports that can be good community partners for your school site or district. Did that answer your question, Denise?
Yes, thank you. It's just, we're still vetting some partnerships, and I'm assuming we'll continue to do that. And I just didn't know if that was okay at the time of submission. That there'll probably be updates along the way, right? If we were to get the grant.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, and I do want to say this, if you don't have anything in place that's been mentioned so far, please do not feel discouraged. If you see the note from David within the chat, we're focusing on continuous improvement. We're evolving our schools, right? And in this process, we're all going to start with different baselines. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, we're making sure through this grant that we're going to do everything in our power through a community schools framework and the needs of our environment, that we're doing everything to push change and push for innovation within our schools that is going to lead us to positive student outcomes. So don't be worried, don't be discouraged. Take risk, do everything you can, right? Because sometimes we need to take risks, and partnerships will come, go, and change, as Siobhan mentioned. So please do not worry and be afraid if you start on a different playing field than a colleague.
And just to add to that, because we were on a call with Lisa Reimers from CDE today, and even though it was around the APR, the annual progress report, she said your goals are going to change even from year to year. Something might happen. You need to be able to adapt. It's really about how are you supporting your community through the process. And so change will come throughout this.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that's part of when you have a continuous improvement model, which is one of the things embedded in the California schools framework, is that year to year, you're looking at what's working and what's not working, right? So sometimes we can keep things the same. Sometimes we got to revise, and sometimes we got to totally start from scratch and try something else. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a suggested timeline, because I know this is what's big in everybody's mind. How much time do I have? Okay. So based on the information that we received from the state so far, they're looking to release the application about mid-November. Okay, mid-November. So I would, for the next couple of weeks, I would be checking the CDE website to see if it's coming out. All you got to do is Google CDE and the name of this grant. It will take you to the page and let you know that the applications is out. But also, as an entity, when we know the application is out, we will also communicate that as well. But we're looking for a mid-November release. This year, according to the state, they're actually bumping up the time of submission. I know last year there was a March submission. This year, they have stated that they're looking at a mid-February submission, which means you will have approximately 3.5 months, 4 months to complete this application process. So just give you a little bit, how can it look in context? And again, this is a suggested timeline because everyone may be in a different place. But let's say you are a school site that has not done anything yet, is how this is looked at. So mid-November, the application has released and I'm looking over it. So for that part of November and December, I'm making sure that I have a shared decision-making council that's going to help you through this process, that you have developed a needs and assets assessment plan, and that you have communicated to the stakeholders about starting this process of applying for a community schools grant. Will the UPP be calculated off October? I'm thinking so. that it may be calculated off of that. I'm not sure for 100%, but that is something that we can look for, but I'm sure it will probably go off of the October 2023 CBEDS count. From December to January 2024, you're conducting the needs assessment for each school participating in the grant. I'm going to emphasize this. So if you're a district and you're saying, I'm a district and we're applying for 6 schools, each school must conduct a needs and assets assessment. Okay? You're going to collect and organize and analyze that data for each one of those schools that are participating in the grant and communicate to stakeholders the findings report. And this part is important. So after you conduct your needs and assets assessment, and again, we're going to go more into detail about this in our day 2 that we have for this workshop, you must communicate those results back to your stakeholders. Why? Because they need to know the need for applying for this grant. And you need to keep them in a process, because as you are implementing a grant and you're building those services and building those supports, they're going to know it's based upon those needs that you communicated to them. So that step is very, very, very important. Between January and February 2024, you're going to develop a community school's initial implementation plan for each school participating in the grant. It's each school because each school will probably have different needs. Some needs may be similar, but some needs may be specifically unique to that particular environment. And last, you're going to develop a budget that includes all the schools in the grant. Once you do that, will be mid-February, and that's where you will submit. Are there any questions in regards to this slide? And this is an estimate of what CDE has told us, but from the information they gave us, they are definitely looking at mid-February for submission of the grant. Are there any questions about this?
I do have a question about what we've heard about the 75% of the population being surveyed, or as far as collecting needs assessments. I mean, that makes sense for, you know, numbers like of students or something, but we're talking about community. How would we measure that?
There's so for this grant, I would say you find different ways to survey your community. If you're noticing that, hey, I only maybe have 60% of my people survey, you may have to just do some interviews based on some of those survey results to get additional information. So there are different ways that you can do that, and we will definitely be discussing that our day 2 when we go over how you can do that. And then towards the end, you'll also see some additional information so we can have some meetings prior to day 2. But that is something definitely that can be worked out with being creative and getting that information. The percentage in regards to the needs assessment, they didn't have a percentage listed in the RFA, but you do need to conduct the needs assessment. The 75% is more of a recommendation. You're just going to do the best you can to survey as many people as possible. But they do recommend it, but it's not a have to. I hope that helps.
I have a
Okay.
question. Will we be submitting that as part of the application? They need to see the needs and assets assessment?
Yes, and that's a
Okay.
little bit further in this, so I'll be definitely answering that for you. But yes, you will need to you're going to submit those results. Next slide, please. So now this is the part, Lauren, you just had the perfect segue into my next section. So I like how things work out. That's exciting. So let's talk about the sections of the application. There may be 6 major sections that you're going to complete. You're going to have an application questionnaire, which will be available online once the grant is released. You're going to have an application information sheet. You're going to have a project abstract, which is going to break down your reason for applying. You're going to have a community schools implementation plan. And again, I'm going to emphasize for each school applying in the grant. You're going to have community schools planning artifacts, and you're going to have a program budget worksheet. And I'm going to go into explanation now. Next slide, please. So this is how your application is scored. So whenever you turn in the application, they have rubrics inside of the application that explains how you are scored. So the total score of your application, if you were to get a perfect score, is 100. And this is how they break it down. 50 points is based on demonstrated need. Demonstrated need is basically that eligibility requirement and those competitive priorities. That is going to be 50% of your score. You're going to have 10 points for your application questionnaire. That's the part that's online. That's just going to ask you some general questions about what do you have in place prior to applying for the grant. Your program abstract is 10 points, and that's going to explain to you what exactly are you going to be doing with the grant. The CS implementation plan is 10 points, and that is basically, this is how we're going to implement the community schools framework. This is my project, and this is how I'm going to put it into actions. So that CS implementation plan is the action part of your program abstract. 10 points is on the CS planning artifacts, and this is part of evidence that Lauren, you were asking about earlier. So a planning artifact would be proof that you are meeting as a shared decision-making council. So they're going to ask you for evidence of a roster of that council, and they're going to ask you for evidence of minutes showing that you actually had the meetings that you said you were having. If I'm correct, they only ask you for 2. So the council roster and 2 meetings with minutes showing that you actually met to discuss building a community schools framework. They're going to ask you for the needs and asset assessment summary or findings. There is no template for this. It's whatever report or summary that you have provided to parents, to the council once the assessment has been conducted. So those are where those 10 points come from, proof that you were planning. And last is your program budget worksheet. So how are you going to budget out the money for the length of the grant? So that is how you are scored based off of those sections. Next slide, please. Wow. We have come to questions about everything that was presented today. So I am taking questions at this time. Denise?
Thank you. Yeah. So the abstract is more of the narrative.
Yes.
And then the plan is like the work work plan, the action.
Yes.
Okay.
And in the resource that we will be providing you, it will be linked to an actual document that will help you write the implementation plan.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Kemp, there's a question. Are there recommendations for budget development, i.e. % of personnel versus services?
Right now, we are getting that detailed information for you, and that will be part of I want to say that will be day 3, because that is the last part of putting the grant together, is the budget. So yes, we'll be going over that. Right now, we don't have specific percentages. We're still speaking with CDE and going to a couple things to make sure we have that correct information for you.
Next question. We are just starting out and wanting to get community input. Do you have any sample questions we should be asking?
Oh, good question. I'm going to go to I have a couple of slides that's later on, and we can talk about setting up some time to meet about that, if that's okay.
And we can send a sample survey out in our follow-up to the webinar as well.
Yes.
Next question. In most instances, we develop the budget and design the narrative justifying the funds. Could it be sooner? Ms. Jody, can you rephrase, can you clarify the could be sooner part?
Well, she mentioned that you wouldn't really have budget details until January. And that's kind of, isn't that the date that you were referring?
Oh, no, we will have budget details before then to make sure I had the right correction to that specific answer.
Got it.
I don't want to just give you anything right now.
Sure. Okay.
So I want to get the specifics for you, and we can have it before we actually have that day 3.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Next question. If we are applying for multiple schools within the district, will the implementation plans look pretty similar from school to school outside of individualizing how the money will be spent at each site?
It depends upon what your needs and asset assessment plan assessment results are. There may be, of course, similarities across some schools, but some schools may be different. So it just basically really depends on the needs of that site, to be quite honest. And if they all look pretty similar, then they're going to look pretty similar. They're still going to make you have one per each site.
And Chase, I'll give an example. If the district is, let's say, fairly large, sometimes the neighborhoods and resources that are accessible, the resources that are accessible in the neighborhood could be different. So when we do our needs and assets assessment, we're also going to identify geographical assets and what we have at our disposal. So it could be, for example, that there is a American Tires in close relation to a high school that has an automotive CTE pathway that shifts the partnerships and the plan for that school. If that makes sense, you want to make sure that we're looking at resources based on geography and need, as well as things that are already provided in the district. So they may be different.
Right. I hear what you're saying, Chase. Exactly. So some of the partnerships may look the same. Some may look different depending upon where they're located. Denise, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have a question about transportation needs. I know equipment is said to not be an allowable expense.
Mm-hmm.
So if we wanted to buy a van, is that like out of the picture?
Ooh. Let me get a answer for that one, because
Okay.
it depends on the context of that.
Okay, thanks.
Melissa?
Yeah, I don't know if the question got skipped or I just missed it, so I apologize. But there was a question in the chat about the RFA from last year and this year. Is there a big difference? Are we expecting a difference?
Well, right now, they said there may be some revisions, but they didn't tell us specifically where and what. So like last year, if I compared cohort 1 to cohort 2, the biggest difference was they added a competitive priority, because in the first year of the implementation grant, small and rural communities wasn't a competitive priority. But for the second cohort, it was a competitive priority. So it depends upon what they're looking at to revise. So we're hoping that in mid-November, when that is going through, we're going to comb through it with every page to see if there has been any changes. They said there may be small revisions, but they didn't give us specifics of what. I hope that helps some.
It does. Thank you. I'm trying to think about getting ahead, but don't want to get too ahead if there's going to be a lot of changes.
No, absolutely. You know, the main part for us having this work group is, number one, today was more of the overview, right? And things were strategically planned for a reason. That day 2 is strategically in December, because we'll have that opportunity before we meet again to go over if there's any changes and prepare for you guys, any new resource that you guys need. So that was the purpose with how we planned it. to make sure we can prepare for any changes, because the last thing we want to do is make this process harder for you to apply. We want to make it easy for you to apply, right? Because we all can use this help with our school sites and our districts. So that was the reason why we planned it the way we did. So I hope that helps even more, Melissa. If there are not any more questions, we'll go ahead and go to the remaining slides because, oh, sorry, Lauren, you have a question. I'm so sorry.
I do too, Dr. Kemp, after Lauren.
Okay. Lauren?
That's okay. I just put my hand up. Thanks. So in the 4 pillars, it talks in your slides earlier on about integrated support services, collaborative leadership, and practices. It talked about how we could spend the money, and it's referred to a lot of professional development. So in my head, I know based off of the other meetings that we can get personnel, but it didn't quite fit those categories. So if we got if we had a wellness center, we were going to hire an associate. I wasn't sure how to.
And is that, and if that is part, if that's part of your project, then yes, that could actually fall under 2 categories. That is a integrated support because it's a wellness center, and then you're also applying for that personnel. So I want to say that was under collaborative leadership. So it would actually hit 2 categories.
Okay, and that's what I saw. I guess just a lot of the bullet points were professional development, common planning time, and it didn't speak to.
Yeah, there was only one bullet point on personnel. So
did I miss that?
Yeah,
I probably just missed it.
But it's in there. There's one bullet point.
Oh,
so
okay.
I would say the biggest thing is just to make sure if it connects to the community schools model, it's a support, but you need somebody to drive that support that would justify hiring that personnel.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Ms. Cara, sorry, Ms. Cara, and then I have Melinda after that.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Okay. Hi, Cara.
Quick question. Hey, guys. First, great and very informative. I just want a little clarification on the competitive priority piece, because it's hard for our district to qualify due to our unduplicated numbers. However, we are doing a lot of this and have potentially some competitive priorities. So can you qualify under the competitive priorities? Am I understanding that wrong?
Okay. So you first are eligible under the first set where we show the 50% or more.
Okay.
So that's the main thing for being eligible. The competitive priorities, the reason why they have that is because they know based on the grant, these are like our biggest areas that we need to fund, those that are hit in these priority areas. Okay. So if you know that, man, I hit one of those priority areas and I'm eligible, you know you have a greater chance of getting the grant.
Okay. Gotcha. That's what I thought. But then I was like, I'm going to ask because maybe there'll be a secret backdoor way or something for districts like ours. But I appreciate that clarification.
No problem. And I see Melinda had, so we're basically taking on what used to be the planning grant and doing that work in order to submit for the, yes. So if you did the planning grant, you're a little bit ahead because the materials that you would have to submit towards the end of your grant is what is needed to apply for the implementation grant. Do we anticipate any difference in the way of scoring will occur based on, so if you qualify for the planning grant, 9 times out of 10, you're going to qualify for the implementation grant. Right now, if you get the grant, it's going to be based on the competitive priorities and what your project is and money availability. You should be able to do that, Chase. The personnel, as long as something directly related to the project that you are doing for your community schools grant.
You will want to make sure that it's documented, Chase, so it does not look like supplanting.
Exactly. You read my mind, Siobhan, because that was my next statement.
And I'll just add, Lisa Reimers from CDE said they're going to be looking very closely at that when they look at expenditures. So you want to keep that in mind.
Okay, since there's no more question, we can go to the next slide.
And I don't know how accessible those symbols are. Dr. Kim, did you want them to drop the symbols or to drop the, you might want to take that closure for me.
Okay, I'm gonna have them answer the question. So we're going to do an optimistic closure on how do you feel that something that you got out of this webinar today. So if you're thinking with your heart, what is something that touched you or meant something to you with this webinar? If you're thinking about more of an idea or concept that you need to dig deeper into, then you can do an answer for that. If you feel that there was something that helped you with a new thought or idea that can help you with applying for the grant, you can drop that in the chat. Or if you got a little bit of wisdom from the workshop and want to share what that wisdom is, you can drop it in the chat. So choose whatever question you like and or put whatever symbol you like and we'll know where you're at. So an idea you want to dig deeper into, a diamond. Ah, new gem. Appreciate it. A diamond. We got some diamonds. I'm appreciating that. Heart, diamond. Oh, thank you, Chase. I'm loving the variety. That means everybody is really, really thinking. Thank you, Carissa. Thank you, Denise.
And as these responses are coming in, we'll go to the next slide. And we're really excited to kick off this workshop with all of you. And as you're dropping in your hearts and spades and clubs, after you do so, please hop in the participation feedback QR code, and Stephanie will drop a link as well. Please share your feedback with us, because as we move forward in the next 2 workshops and further workshops, we want to make sure that we are not only meeting your needs, but engaging everyone in the way that they best receive information. So please complete the workshop as you start to wrap up and pack up. And I will, it's 3:04. Why don't I take about 60 seconds for everyone to do that. We'll finish another Dua Lipa song as I give you all time to do the participation feedback.
Yes, that would be awesome. Thank you, Siobhan.
Diamonds under my eyes. Turn the rhythm up, don't you wanna just come along for the ride? Ooh, I'm so tight. You can see my heartbeat tonight. I can take the heat, baby, best believe that's the moment I shine. 'Cause every romance shakes in your dance, I could dance, I could dance. Watch me. Be burning, but you won't see it. Watch me.
So you still have time for completing that feedback form. David, next slide. While I hit some reminders for all of you, we want to see you at the next 2 sessions. So if you need to share out the work group to anybody else, this QR code will send you to the work group guide. Stephanie has dropped that in the chat a couple of times this afternoon. So please make sure you access that. Next slide, please. And again, I jumped the gun. The next meeting will be December 7th. Those topics will be finalizing the implementation, the finalized sections for the grant RFA, reviewing the rubrics for each section, the community schools application questionnaire, applicant information sheet, project abstract and examples, and the CS planning artifacts and examples. Sure, let's go back one slide. David, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to share, don't forget, we will still be doing our COTP and peer learning webinars, but we're also going to be coming out with some spotlight webinars from our partners. In December, we'll be letting you know about one on data from our evaluative team, and then we'll get into leadership in January, and then in March, we'll have CSHA talking about wellness centers and a wealth of other information. So just keep those in mind because they're coming.
Thanks, David. And we can 2 slide clicks, David. We will be having office hours coming up to dive deeper into the implementation grant application support. So take note of that. The dates are on the screen, and we will send those dates out in our Friday follow-ups as a reminder. Next slide. And as David said, please remember to visit us at our COTPs. There is one single registration link now, so you can register one time for all the COTPs, where we will dive into the technical practices for transforming schools through the community schools model. Next week, we will dive into the first 4 steps of our blueprint towards becoming a community school. So we hope to see you all November 9th at 3 o'clock. Next slide. And then the week after that, we'll see everybody November 15th for the peer learning webinar series, where we get to work together and collaborate and bring in all of our best practices and get a little more time to work with each other and talk with each other about the great things that we're doing. Our last peer learning webinar, we had Serena come in from Mono County Office of Education and share their experiences with their cost team and some cool things that she is doing with Google Sheets and Canva. So please come by our peer learning webinar series and learn from each other. Next slide. And if you are a grantee, or even if you are pursuing a grant, please, you can touch base with each of us. We will be reaching out to all of you to make sure we have a meet and greet session so that we can kick off your coaching series to best meet your needs based on the grant or future grant that you have. So scan the QR code or look at the bookings link that Stephanie has dropped in the chat a few times, so that we can meet all of you. As David just dropped in the chat, we want to meet every single one of you and see where you are and hear your community school story. Next slide. And with that, you can always reach out to us at our email. We are going to be increasing our presence on X, and we would love to hear the work that you're doing at your sites. So if you have something you want to share with us, please hashtag SI-RTAC story so we can check out the amazing work you are doing. And if you need us very quickly, there's a phone number as well for you to contact any of us. And that includes our partner in crime behind the scenes, Stephanie Mahi. Next slide. Or is that it? That's probably
that is it. Thank you all for coming out and joining us today. We really hope the information that you received was informative. Please, again, make sure you have completed the participated feedback. That helps us to determine if we're on the right track with providing you with the best support that you need. So please complete that. Also, again, we do have the implementation grant RFA guide that has resources on it. There are live links that will take you to resources and examples for different parts of sections that you need to complete the grant. And since it is a live doc, as we get resources, we will add to it as we are going around this process. So for example, after this webinar today, we will be adding the slide deck to that resource for you to have and refer to. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Dance, I could dance, I could